after the acclaimed director Peter Bogdanovich passed away in 2022. His Los Angeles home, a classic Mediterranean revival tucked just off Mulholland Drive, was quietly listed off-market. The house, originally built in the 1920s, had an air of faded Hollywood grandeur. Arched doorways, worn terracotta floors, dusty chandeliers, and a pool shaded by twisted olive trees. It sat unsold for over a year. In the spring of 2023, the property was purchased by a couple from Austin, Texas, Maggie and Daniel Rice. Newly married and working in the post-production side of film and television, they had long admired Bogdanovich's work. Maggie especially, she'd written her thesis on The Last Picture Show and saw the house as a piece of cinematic history. It felt like fate, she would later say. Like the house found us. The first few weeks were peaceful. The house needed updates but had great bones. Daniel installed new lighting in the upstairs hallway, and Maggie worked from Peter's former study, which overlooked the garden. She kept most of his old books on the shelves. Hawks, Wells, Ford. There was even an old director's chair in the corner with his initials stitched into the canvas. The first strange thing happened at night. Maggie had trouble sleeping. Not nightmares, just a persistent, uneasy feeling. One evening around 3:15 a.m., she woke to the sound of film reels spinning, a dry, clicking rhythm. When she went into the study, the sound stopped. She chalked it up to imagination or maybe plumbing. But it returned the next night, and the one after that. Daniel didn't hear it at first, but on the fourth night, as they lay in bed, he sat bolt upright. "Do you hear that?" Click, click. Click, click, click. It was coming from the walls or beneath the floorboards or maybe directly above the ceiling. Soon, other things followed. Books falling from the shelves. Lights flickering in the exact rhythm of old projector frames. On one occasion, the projector in the media room, a vintage model they hadn't used, powered on by itself. It projected nothing, just white static against the far wall, humming softly like a sigh. They began to research the house more deeply. Daniel found old photos, Peter with Sybil Shepherd in the garden, Orson Welles at the poolside. The study, it turned out, had once been Peter's bedroom before he moved it downstairs in the 90s. It was where he'd done most of his writing after his health declined. Maggie became obsessed with the details of his life. She started leaving a glass of bourbon in the study at night. She said it was a peace offering. She spoke to the air sometimes, even when Daniel was in the room. Then came the voices. Late at night, muffled conversation would echo through the hallway. Sometimes it was a man. Sometimes two men, one with a gravelly voice and an accent. It always sounded like the end of an argument, resigned, frustrated, sorrowful. The couple invited a sound engineer friend to visit, to rule out audio anomalies from nearby studios. But he picked up nothing. Only at 3:15 a.m. did a faint, nearly inaudible whisper appear on the spectrogram. Cut, cut, cut. Maggie grew distant. She spent entire days in the study, claiming she was writing something new. When Daniel read the pages, they were dense, rambling monologues in the style of 1970s films. Long pauses, parentheticals, camera directions like Peter's old shooting scripts. But Maggie said she didn't remember writing any of it. Daniel grew afraid not of ghosts, but of the effect the house was having on his wife. Then, in early December, Maggie vanished for nearly 3 hours one night. He found her barefoot, standing in the garden with a vintage camera in her hand, the kind Peter had used on his early films. "He needed one more take," she said quietly. The house was sold less than 2 months later. Today, the Rices live in Chicago. They refuse to speak to journalists, but a friend of theirs posted online that Daniel has forbidden any mention of Bogdanovich's name in their home. Maggie still writes, but privately. Her last screenplay, sent only to close friends, is titled The Projectionist's Widow. The house sits vacant again, surrounded by locked iron gates. Real estate records show it's technically available, but every time someone inquires, the sale falls through. Rumor is no one wants to move in after 3 p.m. The listing agent, who asked not to be named, said something odd once during a podcast interview. Some houses have a heartbeat. That one has a film reel, still running, still turning. and it's always waiting for someone to yell action. The Rice couple moved out in a quiet rush. A few neighbors saw a U-Haul early one morning in late January, parked crookedly in the steep driveway while Daniel carried out mismatched boxes, their edges soft and bowed from the rain. Maggie wasn't helping. She stood at the arched front doorway, shoulders hunched under a quilted coat, her expression blank as the driveway darkened from drizzle. A neighbor waved from across the street. Maggie didn't wave back. Her gaze seemed to fall just past the trees, past the wrought iron gates and thick Hollywood hedges, to something only she could see. For weeks after they left, the house sat dormant, windows black at all hours. The mailbox grew full. A pile of film industry magazines, a lost wedding invitation, a single envelope with no return address. The garden began to retake the borders of the lawn. Feral rosemary bushes curled like skeletal hands over the brick path, and vines clung tighter to the stucco like they were trying to keep something inside. Then came the next owners, or rather, renters. A pair of sisters, one an art director for music videos, the other a costume designer for an up-and-coming horror production company. They went by their stage names Flora and Martine and spoke of the house as an energy space more than a property. They rented it short-term while their own mid-city home was being fumigated. Flora posted about it online, calling it an undiscovered jewel of LA Gothic, and used the study as a set for TikToks and short reels. Her followers loved the aesthetic dusty glamour, palm shadows in long hallways, fading wallpaper patterns behind Art Deco sconces. It wasn't long before the sisters began to feel things. It started in the dining room. They had planned a small housewarming dinner, just 4 friends, simple dishes, candles, a bottle of Syrah. But midway through the meal, Martine went pale and dropped her fork. "There's someone watching from the hall," she whispered. Her sister turned to look. The hallway was dim but empty, a mirror reflecting the candlelight and shadows. One guest laughed nervously and said it was probably the wine. But Flora knew the shape her sister described. She'd seen it too just once before in the reflection of her phone while filming a video. A narrow figure at the far end of the frame. Dark suit, wide shoulders, no movement, just watching. After that, they moved the mirror into the garage. One morning, around 4 a.m., Martine heard a voice near her bed. She described it later as hoarse but elegant. Like someone who smoked for 50 years but had perfect enunciation. Said only one word. "Rehearsal." She jumped up, heart thudding in her throat. The hallway was empty. The window closed. The air in the room smelled faintly of cologne, vintage cologne, the kind worn by men who still carried handkerchiefs. The sisters didn't sleep in separate rooms after that. Flora, hoping to push back against the atmosphere, turned the study into a full-blown set. Tripod, ring lights, velvet backdrop. She filled it with ferns and vintage props and turned her camera to face the old director's chair in the corner. The first video she shot in there was meant to be a soft-spoken monologue about set design. But when she played the clip back, her voice sounded wrong. Slower. The intonation had changed, more deliberate, with pauses and inflections that weren't there when she recorded. She watched the clip a second time and realized she never remembered saying half of what she did. And behind her, just above the edge of the frame, a shadow moved. Not fast, not sudden, just a subtle shift, like someone standing just behind the camera lens had leaned in slightly. Her viewers commented on it. Some said it was just light. Others timestamped it and zoomed in. One user messaged her privately. "Is that Peter Bogdanovich's house? You should leave. That energy is not passive." Flora stopped recording videos for 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the projector began turning itself on again. This time, it wasn't static. The sisters walked into the media room one night to find black and white footage playing on the wall, grainy, low-resolution film that neither of them recognized. There were no characters, just a tracking shot of a road stretching endlessly through flat fields. The audio was warped and faint, like wind hitting a microphone. But beneath it, very softly, you could hear breathing. The next morning, the film wasn't there. No files, no reels, nothing in the system. Martine contacted a medium. She didn't tell Flora. The woman who came was in her 50s, quiet, dressed in black linen, her silver hair tied in a low braid. She walked through the house silently for nearly 20 minutes before stopping in the study. "This room is full," she said. "Not with evil, but with sadness and pride, like someone who didn't get to finish what he started." Martine asked if he was trapped. The woman didn't answer. She just turned to the old director's chair in the corner and stared at it, long enough that Martine began to feel nervous. Then she said, "Do not sit in that chair, ever." After the visit from the medium, something in the house seemed to shift subtly at first, like a stagehand rearranging props when no one was watching. The air in the study grew heavier, dense with something unspeakable. The scent of the old books turned sharper, edged with the bitter bite of tobacco and mildew. And the chair, the one the medium warned about, began to occupy more than just physical space. Flora swore she never sat in it. Martine believed her. But there were days when Flora would wake up in the middle of the night, stiff and confused, and find herself in the study, standing, facing the chair, as if she'd been summoned. "Sometimes," she whispered to her sister, "I feel like I'm the one being filmed." Martine tried to distract them both. She covered the chair with an antique quilt. She closed the doors to the study each night. She turned their attention back to work, back to anything that wasn't the slow, creeping sense that the house was drawing them deeper into something old and unfinished. But it didn't help. The lights began flickering again. Only this time they pulsed rhythmically like cues. On off, on off. Long pause. A slow fade. It reminded Flora of scene changes in a rehearsal hall, the kind she'd watched directors signal during dress rehearsals. Sometimes the flickering stopped only when one of them spoke. Not anything specific, just something spoken aloud, as if the house required dialogue to advance to the next moment. Then the phones started ringing. Not their cell phones, the landline. A dusty rotary phone mounted in the hallway by the kitchen. They had never used it. No one had. But it began to ring each night at 3:15 a.m., without fail. Always 3 short rings. Then silence. When they picked it up, there was nothing. Not even static. Just an immense silence, pressing against their ear like the other end of the line was somewhere very, very deep. Martine stopped answering. Flora didn't. One night, after the 3rd ring, she walked calmly to the phone and answered it. Martine sat up in bed, listening from the room across the hall. Flora didn't speak. She just stood there, receiver to her ear. Martine approached slowly and placed a hand on her sister's shoulder. It was ice cold. Flora finally whispered something. One word. Rolling. The next morning, neither of them mentioned it. But the silence between them grew. The kind of silence filled with unspoken understanding, and something darker, something neither wanted to define. On a Saturday afternoon, while Flora was out meeting with a stylist in Silver Lake, Martine opened the closet in the hallway and discovered a forgotten cardboard box marked PB Personal. It was heavy, taped shut, and the corners were water-warped, as if it had been left somewhere damp for a long time. Inside were reels, film reels, but none were labeled. There was also a leather-bound journal. It wasn't a diary, exactly more of a notebook. Story outlines, sketches of shot compositions, fragments of conversations. One entry was written with erratic, slanted handwriting. "They want it finished, but it's not the same script anymore. I hear them in the walls, whispering stage directions I never wrote. I'm not the director anymore. I'm the scene." The handwriting shifted halfway through the page. Tighter, more rigid, as if someone else had picked up the pen. "No one ever leaves the frame." Martine slammed the journal shut. She tried to burn it in the fireplace that night, but it wouldn't catch. The pages curled at the edges, darkened, smoked, but the center never ignited. She dumped water on it, heart racing, and locked it back in the closet. That night the house made noise. Not creaks, not the settling of old wood, but noise. Music from a different era. Low orchestral swells. The rising pitch of suspense. Violins. A single trumpet. The sound of a scene building toward climax. And beneath it, the distant sound of film running through a projector. Martine stood in the center of the hallway, eyes closed, listening. She felt cold breath on her neck. Something brushed past her shoulder, no weight, no body. Just the unmistakable presence of a figure moving behind her. Presence with intent. Presence rehearsing. And then, from the study, she heard a voice. Places. The lights in the house all flickered once, then went out. Flora didn't return until morning. She found her sister on the floor of the study, asleep or unconscious, curled up beside the director's chair, one hand resting on the real box they had never opened. When Flora gently shook her awake, Martine stared at her, confused, then asked a question that chilled her to the bone. Did we get the shot? The sisters didn't last much longer in the house after that night. Martine never fully recovered from the incident in the study. For days afterward, she drifted through rooms with a slack gaze, responding slowly to questions, her eyes occasionally scanning corners of the ceiling as if something were still hanging there. Flora tried to ground her, forced her outside into sunlight, brewed fresh coffee, opened windows to clear the air. But nothing worked. It was as if part of Martine had been taken, or left behind, in whatever strange psychological space the house had conjured. On their last night there, it rained. Heavy for Los Angeles. The kind of rain that feels like a curtain, thick and uninterrupted, blurring the city beyond the hedges and casting reflections that didn't move quite right across the tile floors. Water pooled at the base of the garden steps, near the warped brick where the original owners once posed for black and white photographs. The olive trees shivered under the weight of water and time. Flora had locked the study 2 days earlier. She'd slid the old desk in front of the door, blocked the threshold with books. It didn't matter. At 3:15 a.m., the lights pulsed throughout the house like the beat of a living organism, and the old landline began to ring again. This time it didn't stop. 3 rings, then silence. 3 more, then again. Martine was the one who answered. Her hand trembled as she lifted the receiver to her ear. Flora stood at the base of the stairs, too scared to move. Martine spoke softly. "Yes," she said. Then again, "Yes, I remember." A pause. "No, we didn't reshoot the ending." Another pause, longer this time. "No, she left. She's not coming back." Then she nodded slowly and whispered, "I know. I'll say it." She hung up the phone. And then, without another word, she walked to the study, moved the desk aside like it weighed nothing, opened the door. The lights flicked off across the house. The only glow came from within the study, soft, amber, like a projection had begun again. Flora ran after her. Inside the room, the air was heavy and dry, filled with dust that shimmered like ash in the glow of the flickering wall. There was no projector in sight, but images played across the far wall. Scenes from a film that didn't exist, or perhaps had never been completed. Black and white, the same stretch of empty road. A woman in profile staring into a mirror. A close-up of hands holding a script that dissolved into smoke. Martine stood in front of it, watching, and sitting in the old director's chair. Someone was there, only for a moment, but Flora saw it. A man, older, wearing a dark jacket, white scarf draped loosely around his neck. His hands steepled in front of his mouth. He didn't turn toward them, didn't acknowledge them. He just stared at the images on the wall as if the cut was almost finished and he was deciding whether to keep it or re-edit everything. Then the light blinked. The chair was empty again, and the film stopped. Silence returned like a held breath being let go all at once. Martine turned to her sister and said, "We need to go now." They didn't pack. They didn't take anything. They left with just the clothes on their backs and drove through the rain until the hills disappeared behind them. Neither of them ever returned. Today, the house is once again empty. It's been over a year. The garden has consumed the walkways. The mailbox rusted shut. The listing was quietly removed from every website without explanation. Those who inquire are told the house is under probate review, though no record of legal action exists. Neighbors say the lights still come on some nights only for a moment, usually after 3 a.m. A soft golden flicker in the study window, then darkness. Others claim to have heard music from the back garden. Strings, a single piano key pressed again and again. One local filmmaker, who once toured the property during its first open house, swears he saw old cue marks etched into the wood of the hallway floors. Little pencil lines, faded from time, as if someone had mapped out movement. He keeps a Polaroid he took from the garden that day. It shows the back of the house mostly shadowed. But in the study window there's a faint reflection. A man with a white scarf. A note is scrawled on the bottom of the photo. No one ever leaves the frame. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.